Greetings, welcome to FreeTalk by Delta Productions. My name is KK, and in the studio together with me, we have Hugo.
Hi guys.
Hi. Hugo, I think it's quite a special occasion for us to do a radio program in English, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's the first time.
It's the second time, is it?
It is the second time?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
All right. Yeah, so, of course, this special occasion, we have a special guest. And actually, Hugo, I thought it is your idea, right? I mean,
yeah,
it is your
I
original
think
idea
it's appropriate for us as future media
people.
personnel. Think like we can do something with our guest today.
So could you introduce our special guest today?
Yeah, sure. Our special guest today is Lee Salter. He's our he's I don't know how to say, but he's a lecturer for me. He's a professor in University of Sussex, and he's a good people.
Good person, yeah.
In my mind.
Yeah, welcome, Lee.
Welcome.
Yeah. Actually, we should mention Dr. Lee Salter, right?
Yeah.
Because,
My bad. I'm nervous, all right? Like, I can do this in English for ages.
Right, Lee, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, so I actually last week we had a screening of his film. I mean,
Secret City.
Film, Secret City in Sussex, and actually, it isn't a new film. I think it is produced in 2012, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So could you briefly talk us through about the Secret City, your film?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a film about a kind of part of Britain that very, very few people know about. In fact, you asked me about radio interviews earlier, and I had a debate with a professor at the London School of Economics, and he didn't really know much about the City of London and its sort of special constitutional relationship to the rest of Britain. So we look at this organisation, this institution called the Corporation of London, and it runs the City of London, which is actually something that not many people know about outside it being a financial district, but it is actually the real City of London. It's got Holborn on one side and the Tower of London on another, and then Old Street in the north and the River Thames on the south. It's a little square mile, and that when we speak of the City of London, that's the City of London. The rest of London isn't actually a city. It's not part of the same thing, and it's got its own police force, its own government. It can make its own rules. Central government's not really allowed to legislate for it, so it has a very peculiar constitutional position, and it has an enormous amount of power internationally and historically that indeed kind of ties it to the development of the British Empire, to the development of slavery, to the expansion of finance capitalism all over the world. And I think nowadays we forget that these ideas, these things, these concepts like globalization, like capitalism, actually really did start in particular locations. Yeah. And I think it's worrying when people don't know about those locations. You know, one of the things we do in the film is ask people where London is. You know, and of course everyone knows where London is, but actually what we find is nobody knows that there's this City of London that
and like
is
the
hidden.
Boundaries between them, like where is the real London is.
Absolutely.
You know, one time when I went to London to the US embassy for visa stuff, and I think I bumped into a sociologist or maybe a volunteer or part-time, like, you know, those people doing surveys, and I think she asked me, do I have any impression on the police force of City of London, or do you feel safe in the City of London? I said, a City of London? Well, I thought it is the M25 thing. And then she explained to me, oh no, actually it's only that's she didn't say square mile, but it's right central London, and I thought that it was only me who didn't know this, but after this, after I watched your film, I said, oh yeah, everyone doesn't know this.
Makes you feel better. Yeah, so we you know, it's interesting actually that you know, in English you sort of say hidden in plain sight. Then in a sense everybody knows about it because you've got St Paul's Cathedral, you've got the Mayor's Show. Even if you walk around it, I mean, it's just an interesting thing to do to see the bollards of the City of London. There are these big griffin like dragon creatures that guard the borders of the City of London, and people walk past it every day, but they don't realize what it is. They don't think about what it is, you know. But it's a curious anomaly, I think, in our country. In part because, for example, my first engagement with the Corporation of London was when we took them to the House of Lords back in, I think, 2002, because they were trying to introduce business votes. So there are 7,000 people and about 20,000 businesses, and they wanted not just to introduce business votes, but to give votes, to allocate votes on the basis of the wealth of the business. So Bank of Shanghai, for example, has votes in the City of London, many votes, whereas someone who lives there only has one vote, you know? So it's a really weird situation, and people don't know. You might have seen in the film, we talk about this guy called the Remembrancer, and he's a member of the Corporation of London that sits in the House of Commons, so he can hear everything and see everything about what's going on and influence policies in the interests of the City of London. Now, what we found subsequent to making the film is that he sits underneath the television cameras, so you'll never see him on TV. Yeah? So when he sits there, you just don't know he's there. So it is really this secret city that you can kind of see in some perspectives, but its hidden purpose remains hidden.
That's what I was thinking, because, well, when I go through the film, and I feel like the business inside the London city that we're calling are kind of like always, not kind of like, but always linked back to the government, that the UK government that we're seeing right now. But a lot of people just doesn't really, I don't want to say it doesn't care, but they kind of like in a blind side that they really don't know about anything of this, just because of like they don't know who own these things or who has the rights to do these things, and they're just having a normal life thinking like, I need to survive in this city and that's all. So like what I saw inside this film is like, it's just an opportunity for people to realize what is really happening right now inside that city. And well, I don't know how to say it, but it's just makes me think of like link back to what happens in Hong Kong as well, because what happens in Hong Kong is the same thing, but much more worse actually.
Yeah, I think close to the end of the film, near the end of the film of Secret City, and then I think it made a point that I forgot the exact wording, but it's like maybe if we focus too much on business, and then we will lose out some of the features of the city,
the heritage, the traditions of the thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I think this kind of closely related to Hong Kong as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you know, one of the things about the City of London is it's not just a case of its impact on the city itself or Greater London, the metropolitan area, but you know, if you look at an economic map of Britain, in every measure, London and the southeast of England dominate. We don't have a balanced economy in this country. You know, there's very little, well, there's not much manufacturing left compared to what there was. We're pretty much dependent on financial services and a few other areas. And that gives a lot of power to those particular interests to dominate the rest of the country. But of course it's international as well, because British capitalism has expanded over the whole world now, you know. And when you start to understand the origins of that system in the City of London in particular, you start to realise how a particular set of interests come to dominate the globe. So when we look at something like the British Empire, you know, you learn in schools in this country that it was kind of, you know, Queen Victoria and, you know, sort of the British government, and they decided to do that. You know, it's rubbish. What happened was merchants in the City of London formed companies like the East India Company and what have you to go around the world and set up trading posts with their own armies. So it'd be like Coca-Cola having its own military to go and do bottling in Colombia or something, you know. And as part of that, you know, one of those trading posts was Hong Kong, and you know, New York was another, and sort of, well, Wall Street and what have you. So the city was very instrumental in spreading capitalism around the world, spreading globalization, and in certain of the areas that got set up, you see it marked with the particular interests of London at the time. So Hong Kong traditionally as a trading post, very heavily influenced by London, really, and by the British, marks then what Hong Kong becomes, because there is a domination of finance in Hong Kong. Now, the very interesting thing about this is that whilst on one hand, Hong Kong's dominated by finance, I think that domination of finance in Hong Kong has actually given it a great deal of power in respect of mainland China, because mainland China doesn't want to lose that link to the global economy and the knowledge that's there and the technology that's employed to facilitate trading in Hong Kong.
The thing is, what Lee just said about is London has a lot of influence to Hong Kong, particularly nowadays. When I look back to the relationship between the two places, then I saw like now Hong Kong people are influencing back to British people. So what do I exactly saying is like do you know about Li Ka-shing? Like he's like the richest guy in Asia basically. So now he owns a lot of things in Britain. He owns like electricity company. He owns like water company in here. Like, and I was just like, whoa, now he's like particularly like kind of like owning the British people, because the British people are paying him to have these things in their home. And that's why I was talking about the relationship between the business and the country, is because Li Ka-shing doesn't want to, because we belong to the mainland China, and he doesn't want to lose money to the mainland China government, and he rather put like his assets to a place that's like a free market to him, and he can trade things and he can earn money in here. And I just feel like the relationship between them is complicated now, and simply because of how mainland China is treating Hong Kong as economic states right now, and in this particular time, like not just like right after the protest happens, it's way before that. Since Hong Kong returns, they always think of like moving stuff back to China. It's because of like they doesn't want to have a free state like Hong Kong to dominate to be the economic states for the countries. It just doesn't make sense for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the first instance, what you're referring to is this process of financialization that is kind of a bit of a buzzword nowadays since the crisis. And it refers to the way in which the things we have are subject solely, if you like, to its finance value. So this is, when you hear about things being privatized, whether it's the NHS or the post office, that's part of financialization. It removes the sort of public good of something and gives it value in terms of its good for investors. So if you look at the London property market, how do you measure a property market, right? Increasing value of properties. Okay, but that doesn't serve Londoners to know that now they can't afford to buy places in their own city, and I dare say the same in Hong Kong. It's very expensive right? So whose measure is that of a good housing market, right? Surely a good housing market should be measured by the ability of people who live there to afford to buy somewhere. But when it's financialized, you only measure it in terms of the return you can get on an investment. Okay, so Britain's been at the forefront of trying to push financialization. Okay, what do they say? They know the price of everything but the value of nothing. Yeah, okay, because it's all reduced to price. Yeah. Now, when you try to export that idea in what we might call sort of global neoliberalism, there's a strange kind of expectation that, that in Britain and America will still dominate, will continue to dominate because they're the best, and the best will always dominate. But of course, that's not what's happened, whether it's the American automotive industry or the British finance sector. We see these challenges coming in, okay? Now, the problem with Britain is, in one respect at least, in a certain kind of narrative, is because they've liberalized or financialized the entire economy, they attract lots of what you'd call foreign direct investment. So Hong Kong business people investing here, Saudi Arabians investing, Russians investing. It's an open economy for investment. China sees that, yeah, and it knows it needs these international links, but it's not ready because of its political system to liberalize everything, okay, to deregulate everything. So you end up with this paradox, this need for a kind of an open, deregulated economic production, but a desire for a regulated, closed political system subject to the Communist Party. So these particular special economic zones serve this purpose of being free markets, free ports, international finance centres, international trading posts. But then China's struggling with, well, what do we do politically? Yeah. So you develop this kind of sense of being free, a sense of having a kind of deregulated economic market. But there's a contradiction because the political freedom that comes with that obviously is absent.
Because I was just talking with Lee about this before the interview. So basically, the system in China right now for foreigners or even for Hong Kong people is like, if you want to invest or if you want to go back to China and work, you need to do some what we call is like a political background check on you to see you if you're any kind of like bad person in their mind, which is like going up against Communist Party, those kind of things. And for me, I just get into this situation so like yesterday, and it was just one of the like worst things ever for me because I know I'm going to fail this test anyway, even though I didn't like verbally support the protests in Hong Kong. But what I've done online, what I speak online, and what I do in my normal activities shows that I go up against the party of Chinese, and they won't allow me to do that. And that employers just told me that if you have anything to do with the umbrella revolutions, or have you ever done something on YouTube, on any channels, that you speak something about Chinese government badly, they will find out and they will hurt you and they won't allow you to go back there. And that's the system that is just kind of like stopping people to go and invest in this place. There's a lot of like business opportunity in there. The labor price is cheap in China. No, not now, but like before that, it was like really cheap. Now it's Vietnam, but like it's still cheap. Yeah. But like, and they still want to go to there because they have people to work. Hey, think about it, 1.4 billions. How about that labor working? All right. So, but the thing is, what they're stopping them is the system inside the party, the political system. What do they see themselves as inside this world? Because they think they control most of the thing in this world, but they not. Because what this world are demanding right now is a free market to flow those things around. But China is not a free market for them. And this just makes them much more difficult to survive.
I think at the same time that I think it can be compared to Singapore, I think, because the recent incident that Lee Kuan Yew died. So Chinese government, or Chinese people, or even Hong Kong people always say that, you see, Singapore doesn't have any freedom of speech, democracy, and things, but Singapore is one of the 4 dragons in Asia. So they're always using Singapore as an idol.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I find the West's relation to China to be hilarious, actually. I was going to say fascinating, but I think it's amusing more than anything. I mean, if people like Noam Chomsky sort of say, look, ultimately all, the US is interested in is what benefits its own economic and national interests, however they're conceived. It doesn't really give a stuff about democracy and freedom and liberty. That's the political rhetoric. So, if you look at somewhere like Saudi Arabia, that's Britain and America America's absolute best friend in the Middle East, and it's the most disgracefully oppressive dictatorship that, you know, there's no freedom whatsoever. Women can't drive cars, people get stoned to death, and I don't mean stoned with that, I mean with the bad stone, you know. I mean, it's a bad place. Yet, you know, it's got oil, and it's a site of stability in the Middle East, so we'll be best friends with them. And when they say, you know, but we're going to overthrow a government here because it doesn't protect basic freedoms, that shows the contradiction. Now, you look at the relation the US has got with China and how that's changed. You know, in 1990, you heard a lot about human rights abuses in Tiananmen Square and Tibet and everything. But now China has become the major trading partner and the major productive hub around the world. Now, labour may not be as cheap as it was, but it is plentiful. You know, that there is this kind of desire. All of the British and American and European companies, they send everything to China to assemble, to put together, and all of this, you know. They don't want to lose that. So in a sense, they don't really care about the human rights situation anymore. They never really did. What they cared about was access to a Chinese market. So as soon as, you know, they started to deal with the World Trade Organization and GATT's legislation and things, that kind of critique of China started disappearing. And now you won't hear a British politician say a bad word about China. It's all absolutely fine. Even with Hong Kong kicking off, you know, what could they say? We're going to invade China? Good luck. You know, we're going to put some economic pressure on China. Well, they own your economy. I mean, they own the American debt now. Yeah. You know, what can the Americans do? What can the British do? Yeah. Okay, so there's this paradox now, you know, in terms of political rhetoric, that China is no longer really an enemy. Why? Not because it's given liberties, but because of the economic relations that you know it's involved in.
Because, well, that's what I was thinking, because when we talk about human rights, it sounds like a perfect term for a lot of people. What you've about human rights is like you got a freedom of speech, you got to vote for the people that you want to vote for, and like everything seems so cool, but there's no like human rights in this world actually. It just doesn't exist. And for media practitioners, especially for journalists, when they try to cover something about human rights, that thing doesn't exist anyway. So how do you? So that is what my question about them always is. There's no human rights. So what? Like, but what the hell you're talking about then inside your paper? It doesn't make sense to me. But for them, for these journalists, they feel like they deserve that. They feel like they need to have that to you know, cover the things that they want to cover. They want to do things that they want to do. And I just feel like in this world right now, in every country, I would say, you don't have that. Every journalist don't have that. And that's just a dream right there.
Yeah. Regarding to media or journalists, so Lee, do you think, I mean, what do you think about the relationship between politics and media, or the governments, or between governments and media? So what do you think about? Yeah, I mean, what should the media do? Or
sure. I mean, one of my first entry points, you know, before I became an academic, was Herman and Chomsky's book Manufacturing Consent. And you know, a lot of media scholars, and certainly the vast majority of journalists, hate that book because it doesn't paint them in a good light. It says that, you know, for whatever reason, newspapers, news organizations, the major ones at least, you know, the mainstream media, tend to follow the interests of their respective governments. Okay, and journalists hate being told this, because journalists think as individuals, well, they're perfectly, you know, moral and ethical, and they believe in human rights. But you know, what they talk about is this filtering process that, yeah, once it gets through the industrial news machine, what you're left with is, you know, a reflection of your country's sort of interests. Now, you know, obviously with so much criticism being faced by academics and journalists, you know, one is kind of desperately trying to find reasons not to agree with them. I haven't found them. In every single thing I've ever studied, I find the same stuff. That is, if it's an enemy of the British government, it's an enemy of the British press. If it's an enemy of the American government, it's an enemy of the American press. Invariably, okay, you know, I've used the example of Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's insane that we can be allies of this country. I mean, it's brutal, right? But it's also strange when you look at human rights organisations who give a lot of that of those stories to the newspapers. Now, you know, we will hear about bloggers in China or bloggers in Singapore or bloggers in Iran or bloggers in Cuba, you know, being arrested and this, that and the other. You know, I say this at every available opportunity because I still can't quite believe it. During the 2011 riots in this country, there were 4 young men between 16 and 18 who, on Facebook and on Twitter, I think mainly Facebook, had written comments about the riots, okay, in inverted commas, inciting riots. Okay, one of them said something like, in Dundee, I think, had written on his Facebook account, anyone fancy going into the town centre for a bit of a ruck? Ha, ha, ha. Okay? He got 4 years in prison. 4 years. I mean, you know, the stuff I've written on Facebook, I'd probably have a life sentence, you know?
Hey, that's what they call disrupting the public orders.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a public order offence, absolutely. And he got 4 years for it. Now, that went to appeal, and the judge upheld 4 years. I didn't see Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch condemning the British government for restrictions on free speech. It didn't happen. No one cared. You know, because when our government does it, yes, you know, that's kind of understandable. We can understand the reasons for that because people were scared and upset in the riots, okay? Which are the kind of similar arguments that the Chinese authorities would be using in relation to Hong Kong. Oh, these demonstrations disturb people, they upset people, so we have to clamp down on them and stop them because it will disrupt public order.
Yeah, like not just for the public order inside the Chinese government. So what they do in Hong Kong is basically we don't have a law actually to restrain or like arrest people because they disrupt public orders. We don't have that yet. But we
are freer than the British because we do.
That's just the thing. Like what they do inside the protest is they are using the social network or not to do, you know, like to transport the message, to spread the news of what is happening, what is going on right now. But the thing is, for them, they didn't realize that there's a law inside the Legislative Council is waiting to get approved. So there's the public order things now.
Yeah.
If it's go through. And people just doesn't realize that, and they keep using this social network to do things like this. Eventually, if this law goes through, hey, we are going to get caught.
Yeah.
I think let me talk about the London riot thing, like 2011 or 2011.
2011, yeah.
And I think there is a very famous video about the BBC News. I think it was a live interview with an author, or I think it was
Darkest How.
Yeah,
Black
Black
writer.
Author,
Yeah.
I've watched that on YouTube, and it was quite interesting that the anchor, the news anchor, was trying to stop him from saying something. But hey, House, right?
Yeah.
Mr. House, don't you think that's a bad thing to do? And Mr. House, no, I think they're doing a good thing and they're reasonable. Blah, blah, blah. And the anchor was trying to stop him. No, you can't say that. Yeah, I think so.
And then accuses him of being a rioter.
Yeah. Yeah. Has it been kind of material for tutorials or?
We've visited this on class.
Oh, really?
It's a reflection, actually. You look at it, and this is how a news practitioners for a national news corporations is treating the people that are against the public orders.
Yeah.
So they're helping the government to do it. Same thing to a lot of the place. Like when you see America is the same thing. If you are protesters and you're disrupting public orders, the media will go against you. There's no way you can win. Yeah. Because the media always wins. They control the flows of how the public opinion is thinking. Yeah. And there's no way one man that can change the whole thing. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah.
I mean, it's particularly disturbing in this country where we've got, you can name the people: Rupert Murdoch, Richard Desmond, the Barclay brothers, and Alexander Lebedev. four people, they own most of the British media. And, Rupert Murdoch is Australian American. Richard Desmond is a porn baron. Lebedev is a Russian oligarch, and the Barclay brothers are tax exiles living on the moon or something. Or Jersey actually. But they're not part of the community here, but they are part of a global elite of people who do want stability in their interests, and this is what it all comes down to. In whose interests is this taking place, okay? Because there's nothing necessarily wrong with public order, but the question we always go to is, whose public order? So when the Chinese government is clamping down on Hong Kong protesters, they will use the rhetoric of public order. And you say, yeah, but we want our order, not your order. That's what we're fighting against. That's why we're fighting, And I think every protest situation has to ask that question: whose order are we upsetting, and whose interests does it serve? So when you've got a situation like we've got in this country where and it's quite interesting for a Hong Kong audience to know that in this country, if you're poor, you have to go to these food banks that we've now got, where you go and beg for food, like in Victorian times, where people are being kicked out of their homes, where something like 40 people, at absolute minimum, confirmed figure of 40 people have committed suicide over the past few years because their disability benefits have been cut and things like this. That's not a good order. That's not, that is disorder, surely. If people are living such difficult lives, that's disorder. So to have a protest that's disorderly to create a better order isn't necessarily a bad thing, surely, So I think these, getting a grip on what it is that these phrases represent, whose interests they represent, who has the power behind them, I think is a really necessary thing to engage when you look at situations like Hong Kong or anywhere else around the world.
Yeah, so now we've been talking about like the elitism of mainstream media. So do you think everyone in the society should be an individual journalist in some sense? Because there's this saying in Hong Kong now, so we can't trust the mainstream media anymore, especially they did not really cover the social protest.
Like a lot of them belong to the global elite, things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So basically, they're owned by the government, and they help the government to say things.
Yeah. So do you think everyone should be a journalist in some sense?
Okay. I mean, in the first instance, never trust the mainstream media anywhere. Okay. But a bit of advice on how to read the media is whenever you see a story, just check it. We've got Google. Do a Google search for the story and see what other things are said about that story, and you can build a better picture yourself. Okay, so there's something you can do right away to make sure that you understand the world in a better way. In terms of kind of that idea of everyone being a journalist, I mean, my argument, and I wrote a book called Digital Journalism where we look in a lot of detail about these sorts of questions. And, there's generally these two kind of positions. One is that journalism's dead because everyone's got phones nowadays, okay? And the other argument is, citizen journalism, using your phone, that's all a load of nonsense. You should only listen to mainstream. Now, life's more complex than that, okay? There's an interweaving here. My argument is actually that professional journalism is more necessary now than ever, okay? It's something we've never had. Okay, so let's not think the past was better, because it wasn't, okay? But there's an opportunity now so that when we see stories circulating around the web, for example, we journalists can come in, follow up those stories and check them, okay? Now, I've got a disturbing example that kind of sent me crazy on the weekend. This plane that crashed, the German plane that crashed over the Alps, So there's all this speculation about why he did it, who did it, and so on. Now, it's something interesting about global media as well. I subscribe on Facebook to a Kurdish site on Facebook because I'm interested in the plight of the Kurds in northern Iraq and Syria and Turkey. And they had published an article from the US, from an organization called, and you should beep this out so no one ever looks at it. group in the US. And it was an article about the truth of who the co-pilot was that crashed the plane. And they had published from an online German news source this article that proves that he was a Muslim. Okay? Now, this article was shared when I last had the stomach to look at it 20,000 times. So it must have been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. The only evidence they've got for this guy being Muslim is they took screen grabs of a Facebook page saying kind of in memory of the pilot's name, lots of it written in Arabic, and all of these comments and things, okay, saying, yes, he was a Muslim brother who did this for Allah and so on. Nobody in this site had noticed that the actual page had 1 like. Yeah? So I kind of thought, well, I need to correct them. So I wrote a comment saying, guys, what are you doing? Has anyone actually looked at the original source? Because this evidence has got 1 person, which makes it seem like it might be a setup, it might be a fraud, someone's pulling your leg. And then I looked down the comments and there were thousands of comments going, yeah, the mainstream media will never print this, the mainstream media will tell us that he's just depressed and all of this sort of stuff. So because the mainstream media was saying something else, then automatically he must be a Muslim. Why? Because 1 person set up 1 Facebook page with 1 like, which is all of the evidence in the world. Yeah. So the qualification is, yes, it's great for everyone to be a journalist, but for God's sake, what we need is to ensure that the principles of what should be good journalism, which we don't have, but it's what we should aspire to, things like fact-checking, things like challenging those in power, things like trying to portray the world from the view of the little people and all of this sort of stuff, are adhered to by citizen journalists if they're not by the mainstream journalists, So I think there's definitely a space for it. I think it's important, especially as these pressures of these global financial elites who have taken over the mainstream media have reduced public debate, have turned, coverage of things like the Umbrella Revolution into a kind of parody or into a great threat to stability and Chinese security. The more that happens, the more we need people, who are ordinary to actually report the other side. But when they do it, there needs to be organizations, training networks who can help people kind of try and create a more accurate picture of what's going on.
Right. So lastly, do you have any advice for us as media practitioners like me and Hugo are Hongkongers? And do you have any advice for us to protect Hong Kong's dignity and interest?
Do you have any suggestions for us for being a future media practitioners in not just maybe in Hong Kong, but maybe sometimes what I was talking about in China or maybe in some other countries as well?
Well, Hong Kong is in a very difficult position. I think its value to China in terms of preserving its special status, consists in the ability of Hong Kong to lead on international relations, finance, and all of this sort of stuff. So the reasons it's a special zone in the first place, but that can also conspire with Chinese power as they try to introduce various constitutional reforms, yet retain the position of finance in Hong Kong. Now, I'm no expert on Hong Kong, but what struck me about these protests and what strikes me about Hong Kong more generally is the notion of identity, of what is Hong Kong, what makes it special. Now, I'm sure from the position of the Chinese government, what made Hong Kong special was simply that it wasn't ours and now it is, so we had to put up with that. The British, when they left, they introduced constitutional reforms. Why? Not to help Hong Kong, but to trip up China, to make it more difficult to reassert authority. So, my advice, in a sense, would be for there to be serious public debate within Hong Kong about what Hong Kong is. It's not just a financial centre. It's not just the drip at the bottom of China. It's not just a former English colony. There's something about it, and there are aspirations of the people in Hong Kong. And I think there needs to be a way of finding out what that identity should be and discussing it and articulating it. And if the mainstream media won't carry that, then you need to set up your own media, your own organisations, radio stations, websites, sort of video reports, and try to engender a sense of being Hong Kong that carries with it the sorts of values, of a society in which you want to live in the future. I think that's the first step, because a lot of what I've seen has been either shall we be more like China, or shall we hark back to the English imperialist days, or shall we just submit to finance? I think Hong Kong's got something, and it's got a history, it's got a culture, it's got traditions, and I think those need to be at the forefront of discussions about the future of Hong Kong.
Okay, cool.
Right.
So thank you very much, Lee. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, finally our program has to draw to an end. So yeah.
Time limit.
Yeah, Hugo, I thought it is a very precious experience for us. So thank you for organizing.
Oh no, it's a pleasure to have Lee in here, and what I say, to have such a professionals like media practitioner in here telling us like what is going on in this world right now, not just for the UK but in Hong Kong and all over the world as well, is a precious experience for us, and I'm truly grateful as well.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope that was
Thanks.
all right. Any problems, just let me
No
know,
problem.
and
Cheers.
I'll come back. No worries, man. Okay.